my name is Joris Peels. I'm a 3D printing consultant. I specialize in strategy for consumer-made products. So desktop 3D printing, products made by consumers, products made for consumers. I also write for TCT Magazine and Inside 3DP. There are other things I do as well. I work for Umagine. Umagine is an open source platform for people to remix things, to share, and to work collaboratively together on complex 3D printed items. And we essentially want to make things malleable. We want to do the heavy lifting, the plumbing in 3D printing to make the end-to-end open source tool chain to make things as malleable as memes or as malleable as cat pictures are on the internet. I'm also involved with Oblique, which I started together with Christina Rebel, which is a curated collection of 3D printed design, engineering, and art. And we're trying to find new design directions in 3D printing in order to catalog what is going on and what has happened. So if that's oblique.cc if you want to check that out at one point. Also recently we started up Mecanicos, which is a collective of people making tools to improve 3D printing. And I'm also, in a short while, going to be launching a 3D printed jewelry brand. These things will come back during the presentation. Now first off, some advice: never start your presentation with a quote. It's a sign of weakness. This is the very famous quote, "The known unknowns and the unknown unknowns" by Donald Rumsfeld. And definitely don't have lots of quotes in your speech, because that's very confusing to people. But this really defines the way I think about knowledge and acquiring knowledge and spotting trends and knowing what is real and what is not. And the object of this presentation is to show you a framework that I use to distinguish signals from noise. Because there's a lot of noise in 3D printing. There's a lot of like straight up bull coming out right nowadays, and stuff that just does not make sense. People are lying, people are just making things up, and then a lot of people are getting the core narrative of what's important and what's not important are getting it wrong. And so that's why the last quote is very important. Those who have knowledge don't predict, those who predict don't have knowledge. And I'm going to make some predictions later on. And the idea of this presentation is to give you a framework by which you can judge what is actually going on and what is not going on, to help you take stock for a moment and to see the signals and to discount the noise. Now, you'll see Thomas Watson, a very, very influential guy at IBM. He's now remembered mostly for making one of the top 10 stupidest predictions of all time. There is only a market for 5 computers. Now, in the medium term, he is spectacularly wrong, because there are hundreds of millions of PCs. But nowadays, with the cloud, we might be walking into a time frame where maybe there will only be 5 computers: a Google computer, an Apple computer, an Amazon computer. So predictions all depend on time frame. Similarly, my dad is an AS400 guy, a server guy. When when the PC came out, his colleagues always thought that this was a very bad idea, the PC, and they thought that a server with a thin client type of solution was really the best architecture. And right now they're getting validated. Many years later, the PC architecture is going towards this cloud-heavy, light device type of architecture. So any kind of prediction depends on when you make it. And this is a framework where I use this myself. And most of it's quite self-evident. One thing that's very important to notice: people who are good at selling something to you, people who seem very truthful, who seem very clear, often don't have any idea what they're talking about. The dumber you are, the more unequivocal and more convincing you can be about what you're talking about. Insiders value their own information, and they value the information they have, and so they don't share a lot of this information. Our minds work in a certain way. We like to logically categorize things, so this makes us miss trends. And we repeat a lot of things. In 3D printing, we repeat 3D printing will democratize innovation. 3D printing will democratize manufacturing. 3D printing will enable people to make things in their homes. And we repeat these things so often that we never really think them through their logical extremes. And this causes people to make a lot of errors. And a lot of mega important developments are part of much, much bigger developments. So for example, the car, the automobile, the rise of the automobile is a very important development. But if you would have been following this very, very closely, you would have missed the fact that the automobile enabled the emerging of suburbia, which completely changed the political and the socioeconomic makeup of the United States of America, for example. So even a big trend like the emergence of the automobile could be part of something much, much larger. So this is the known knowns. right? These are basically outright lies that are repeated again and again and again by the media. And this is the main core narrative. You know, and one of the biggest lies is, with a desktop 3D printer, you can make anything. And the biggest kind of other misconception is, just because you can make a shape of something, this thing is then functional. People will make all they need at home. People are now looking, they don't even make all of their food at home. People want to put their food in microwaves, and now we're saying that everyone wants to design everything, all the things in their homes. Now, there's the widely known knowns, right? And these are things that are more factual and being repeated by the media. Now, one of the things is they don't really analyze these things. So the information is true. But the IPOs, for example, there's a couple of IPOs, and they've been coming up. AOS, Materialize, SLM Solutions, these kind of companies are thinking about going public or have gone public, Voxel, these kind of things. Now, but why is this happening? Well, this is happening because a couple of years ago, 3D printing was an all-you-can-eat buffet, and Abe was the only one that bought a ticket. So basically, 3D Systems was basically buying up the whole entire industry for free, right? They'd buy a company, their share price would go up, they'd buy another company, rinse, repeat. And so the only reason that these companies are all going public right now, it's not to take advantage, it's not to even grow, it's not even to spread the company around the world, it's specifically to be a predator and not be prey for 3D Systems. So that's kind of what's going on. Now, if I talk with people inside the industry about 3D printing, the stuff that we are excited about is certification by certification authorities. The fact that 20,000 dental copings are made a day, the fact that there are over 100,000 surgical guides made with 3D printing, the fact that the default manufacturing technology for in-the-ear implants is 3D printing. We don't talk about whatever Stratasys' stock price is. There are also stuff we don't want to tell the muggles. So things we don't want to say, like everybody's talking about manufacturing. Well, okay, can you really have a manufacturing technology if the margin on your materials are 1,000, 3,000%? 30% of the cost of your part may be labor. There's no closed loop control, and to make a build, to make a part work consistently, there's a lot of thought, a lot of decades of experience that have to go into that. And over the past decade or so, the biggest advances in 3D printing have not come from the machines. They've come from the software side. The ability to repair a file quickly, to slice a file quickly, the ability to email a file to someone, or use FTP or whatever. Those have been the biggest advances in the industry. So on the desktop, there's interesting things that the media is really missing. So they talk a lot about the Kickstarters, which is good. But people might not realize that over $20 million have been raised by 3D printing startups in Kickstarter. And this, plus the fact that a lot of these startups are bootstrapped, mean there are over 25 companies that have over $2 million in revenue, that are profitable, have no debt, and have no outside investors. So there's no VCs. It's just a founder or a group of founders. There are companies that you probably don't realize are shipping over 20,000 3D printers per year. And over 230 companies are active in the space, up from 1 in 2008. Another thing is the build volume has increased anywhere from 100 to 170, a factor of 100 to 170 in 6 years. So there's no real innovation on the desktop. Everybody's basically copying each other, and nobody's really doing anything really interesting except maybe the Delta architecture. But the build volumes have increased significantly in a very, very short time span. Now, this is stuff we don't want you to know, but we all talk about when we're grabbing a beer. There are several really popular machines that are non-functional. These are not functioning machines. These do not work as a 3D printer, but you will read about them in the New York Times. There are machines that are shipped where a significant portion of the machines are dead on arrival. And this has to do with the fact that a lot of times these guys are outgrowing their suppliers continually. So you build 5 machines, you go to Kickstarter, you have to build 1,000 all of a sudden, you need a new supplier, you're negotiating this, and this means that the machine is going to suck throughout the lifetime of the machine. Also, the desktop 3D printing market is a business-to-business market, mostly for most people. Most of these machines are being bought by companies. And a lot of people say, oh, we want 3D printing for everyone. We want to make 3D printing affordable. Meanwhile, we will have higher net margins on our product, on our 3D printer, than Apple has. And we'll have astronomical net margins on our consumables. Then there's also unknown unknowns. I do not know how many 3D printers, desktop 3D printers, have been sold this year or over the past 12 months. A couple of years ago, it was super easy. There's 6 vendors. I would contact the person that bought a printer in January, another one in February, another one in March. I would look at the serial numbers, the packing numbers, the UPS numbers, all these kind of numbers, and I would know to a T how many 3D printers have been sold in that year. Now there are so many vendors that I have vendors coming to me saying, oh, I've sold 3,000 printers, and I cannot find a person that has that machine to verify that even this thing exists. There are companies that disclose sales that I know did not happen. There are lots of things, lots of shenanigans, and I've just basically given up. I do not know how many 3D printed desktop 3D machines have been sold. Another thing that has a huge, huge impact on the industry is, we all know, so the media talks about Materialize and Shapeways as a service. It talks about desktop 3D printers, and it talks about UPS having a store for having a 3D printers in a store. But people don't think through and think, what are the huge titanic shifts in the industry if one of these becomes the dominant platform? On an online 3D printing service, there are only 2 technologies that work. Everything else does not work online because it's too expensive, it's too complicated, or consumers don't like it. If you do an online 3D printing service, 80% of your output is going to be SLS and 20% will be X1. There's nothing else. You can offer them Objet, you can offer them SLA, and they won't do it. Right? So this means that if the online 3D printing services dominate the market, then what will happen is the dominant technologies will be AOS, SLS, and X1, and everything else won't make sense. On the other hand, if the desktop, if UPS in a very, very big way moves into the desktop offering these in-office machines, then Objet or the Dimension line at Stratasys are going to win big because they're easiest to operate in an office environment. So there's titanic shifts that can be made by just 1 or 2 companies being successful. If Shapeways does incredibly well from a marketing perspective, or if UPS moves into this in a big way, there's going to be really, really big things happening. Now, there's also unknown unknowns. It's a blank slide for completeness. We don't know what they are, but you need to know they exist. Now, one thing, this is like a completely stupid thing for me to illustrate why I'm doing this, and to illustrate also how you can make mistakes because your mind categorizes things. So I worked at Materialize, and I believe back then, that 3D printed prosthetics is an $8 billion a year opportunity, and eventually every single prosthetic device will be 3D printed. Everything. It will wipe away all and any other production technologies because the software tool chain is here, the products work, the pricing works, and the only thing missing is FDA certification for a lot of these things. I was working at Materialize at the time. I had a bunch of people around me. You would ask them, like, what do you do? Well, I make software to 3D scan patients to make implants. So I was cognizant of this happening. It was like in the lunchroom. You would walk by these guys making dental copings and Materialized dental stuff. I was also heavily following the desktop 3D printer market, and they really, really sucked back then. And now I knew they would get better. I knew both of these things, but I could have never have envisioned this. For some reason, my mind could not conceive of Enabling the Future, which is an organization I volunteer for, and you should too. And it's a wonderful thing, but I could not envision that people would use desktop 3D printers to make prosthetics. For some reason, that didn't connect. There were 2 different boxes in my mind, and I did not connect them up with each other. And these are the kind of errors of thought that I want to hopefully ensure that you don't make. Because enabling is great, because if you don't know this, basically kids don't get prosthetic hands because they cost tens of thousands of dollars. Kids grow all the time, so they don't get them until they're fully grown. So now people are working together, decentralized, hundreds of people around the world, to 3D print prosthetics. The kid grows, you print them another prosthetic for 50 bucks. And they're functional, and it's a very simple system where some elastic wires, the kid bends his or her wrist, and then you get a semblance of a hand movement, and you can grasp things, grab things, and play and do things like that. This, I think, is one of the best things happening in 3D printing at the moment, and I think you should all get involved because it's a wonderful thing. But again, the important thing for this presentation is I did not see this coming, but I knew prosthetics was happening, I knew desktop 3D printing was happening, but I could not connect the two. Another thing, and this is from Oblique, another thing is we don't really correctly interpret our history. If you would ask people, like, how long has there been 3D printed art or design, and who's the first person to do nature-inspired design, or when, then you come up with a lot of answers, but not the right one, and the right one is Frank Stella. So Frank Stella in 1990 started doing digital sculpture, and in 1993 came up with the first stereolithography 3D printed art. In 1993, that was like literally like Fried must have like been making the machine or something. This was really early days. So if we don't correctly interpret our history, we won't correctly understand what's going on. And so Frank Stella is a wonderful example of this. He's a really famous artist. He's one of the most famous living artists. And still people don't, and there's a lot of media hype about 3D printed art, but somehow the media is not talking about this guy. And so you might miss the fact that he made the first 3D printed art piece in 1993. There's also these paradigms that are so pervasive we don't realize we're in them. So virtually all, and I'm going to say virtually all because I have everything I've found, but virtually all 3D printed art and design is nature-inspired forms. Most of this is generative design. So the designer makes an algorithm, uses a kind of natural law or algorithm or rule or something like that, and then this designs for them. So this is these are very different pieces. This is digital grotesque, also generative. This is Hi-Fi from Nervous System, also a generative art piece. And so this is such a pervasive kind of thing that as a designer you should really be thinking, I'm not going to make a nature-inspired form. Because you'll be like one of the only people, because everyone else is doing the same, like, you know, Nautilus, Fibonacci, generative-inspired shapes. And what if people don't like generative design? Or what if people don't like nature-inspired forms, and all of a sudden none of the 3D printed design sells because everyone's doing the same thing? And please no more fractals. Yeah, do something else than fractals. This has to do with your assumptions. And this is not a 3D printed piece, it's an etched piece by Tom Dixon. And Tom Dixon said, we had an idea to make something that could be brought through the internet in components so that we fit through a letterbox. The idea was that it would be produced locally. Right? I've seen this time and time and again on somebody's business plan. Something that goes through a letterbox and that is then produced locally, local shipping, less CO2, heal the world, all that kind of stuff. But what he found is, but the reality is that people prefer to buy it as a flipping ready-made object that is so big that you can't fit it through a letterbox. So according to Tom Dixon, people don't want to assemble their own things. And according to him also, people don't want letterbox-sized things. So this is quite interesting because these people don't check these assumptions. I have people coming to me and saying, oh, we're doing a local production, whatever. Okay, do you even know if people want this? Will people actually pay for this? Now, another thing that's often repeated, so often that it's meaningless, is the whole idea of working together. And working together with people. And the idea is co-creation. So you, together with Vitra, would co-create a chair. Or we would all get together and make a lamp. But no one, in this whole co-creation thing, it's always about end-use products. So it's always about end-use design products. Those are all the examples that people are using. People haven't realized that we could also get together and make 3D printers, or parts for 3D printers, or more complex things, which is what Mechanicos is something I'm involved with, together with Paul Soe and Claudio Nobile and Rich Rapp. Or Richard Horn, by the way. So we're involved in that, and we're making open source tools for 3D printers. So things that like level your print bed or calibrate your 3D printer automatically. And this is something that, again, people are missing this idea of they're saying, yes, people will work together, but they're missing the point that people will work together perhaps without these companies. There's other low barriers to entry. I sell Bitcoin. This is way better Bitcoin than the other Bitcoin because this is gold Bitcoin. And it's way safer than the other Bitcoin because it's actual gold and you can actually hold it. And this is another one is a Raspberry Pi. And this is my non-manifold. It's a jewelry label. The idea is it's for contemporary women. There's like this imaginary kind of space between her expectation of her life and the actual reality and the choices between those two things. And the idea is this is a funny kind of thing. All the bangles in the world are all girly and kind of Barbie bangles, right? So where is the engineering woman going to find a decent bangle for her life? But this took me, I would recommend you all start a jewelry brand. It's great. It'll cost you an afternoon or something. You hire somebody to do a logo. You just send off to X1 for these things. It's super affordable. It's a great hobby. You can tell all your friends like, hey, I have a 3D printing jewelry brand, like for a couple $100. Right, you got a website, e-commerce, everything. It'll take you an afternoon. Now, everybody's talking about we democratize production all the time. And we let more people design. If you tell designers this, they will reflexively always say, but consumers cannot design. But we are a very, very tiny industry. But imagine for a second that every 16-year-old on the planet, instead of doing photography, decides that having their own jewelry brand would be a hobby to have. You know, get rid of the loom stuff, we're going to sell 3D printed jewelry or make it ourselves. They could afford to do this, and then you can say, these people can't design. Well, they'll go on freelancer.com or something, they'll hire a designer to do it for them. They'll hire a graphic designer, and they could then have this as a hobby. Now, that's something that people don't realize, but if this would happen, if this would become a trend, not even worldwide, but 16-year-old girls in Tokyo would be into this, it would radically alter our industry because we are so small and consumer demand is so large. Also, people often talk about democratizing production, and they'll say, X printer is democratizing production by enabling this, or Y 3D printing service is doing the same thing. This is a friend of mine, Olivier van Herpt, and Olivier spent 2 years working on 3D printed ceramics. He doesn't have a company, he didn't have any funds, he didn't have any money, but he spent a lot of time on it. And Olivier has now made a 1.5 meter Delta 3D printer. He can now make objects about 80 centimeters, which are food safe, better looking, and much quicker to print, and much larger than most of the output from industrial and desktop 3D printers. So whereas the desktop industry is all screwing around on 20, 40 centimeters trying to make little plasticky things, he makes a fully functional ceramic object in like 45 minutes at lower cost than a comparable sized object, and very few industrial machines could make a similarly sized object. So you're talking about individual people that at home could leapfrog entire industries by making machines or tools that can leapfrog them. And interestingly, Richard Horn, who's sitting over there, came up with a similar machine, even larger, several weeks after, around the same time as Olivier did. Before or after, I'm not entirely sure. So there's multiple people working on things that completely could, for large scale, eliminate a lot of the people in this thing. The other thing we're talking about, bigger trends. Well, what if 3D printing, and we think it's a huge thing because we're in it, what if 3D printing together with freelancer.com, Salesforce, WordPress, eBay, Alibaba, what if it, and Skype and things like that, what if it means that people will untether from cities? What if this lets people say, this is a co-working space in Bali? Right, there are places in Bali for $1,000, you go there, you live, you have an office, and you're in Bali instead of like in the rain. So what if that is the bigger trend? What if the bigger trend is people can untether from cities and start living in really nice places and not congregate on cities anymore because they're irrelevant? I'm just saying, I don't know if this is happening. It will happen for some people, but not. I don't think this will be a mainstream thing, but I'm just saying, just generally, if this happens, the effects of such a movement will be so much larger than the 3D printing market, and will be so much more pervasive that it's interesting to keep these kind of things in mind. So I'm also involved at Umagine. So what do people make? So Umagine is, yeah, we actually believe in open source. That's the main differentiator that we have from other people, and we're doing the end-to-end tooling. So we're doing heavy lifting as opposed to other people who are doing some simple stuff. And what are people making on our site? We tend to get the most committed open source people, the most interesting people, and they're making things like open source parametric bongs. On the bottom there, you can see this is a baby, maybe it's a baby with a, that has the handles of the baby bottle are 3D printed using a desktop machine. Not a super great idea. The cookie looks an awful lot like an Oreo cookie, but it isn't. We're really proud that PrinterBot has its machines on our site, by the way. This guy, the black thing in the middle, is an open source spice mill. So you can grind your spices up and serve them to your family using ABS PLA filament that you've sourced from God knows where. With you don't know the additives. Trust me, we've done tests, and a lot of these things, you know, the MSDS and the thing don't really match up. What else? This is above the butane. The add-ons for the butane lighter thing is an intimate shower head. Not entirely sure what that is, but we've got rear view mirrors for bicycles. We've got robots that go towards the wetness. And we've got a pom-pom maker. This is a great niche product. If you want to, at one point, make a lot of pom-poms in a very, very short time, this add-on for your drill is the tool for you. So essentially, as a Umagine community manager, this stuff is inspirational and terrifying. Because what we're doing is we're moving from creativity and fun and little tchotchkes, which people used to make, to lamps and robots and things that fly, and things that could catch fire, and things with electricity. And it scares the hell out of me. So what we want to do is, at Imagine, is to make an open source, and we're doing this, we're going to release it next week, thereabouts, and it's going to be our terms of service that are made specifically for a platform that shares files. But you could also use it if you share files on your own site, or if you sell 3D printed files, or anything like that. And the idea is that we have worked with Lauer's IP, which is a IP firm, our community, and a lot of experts from around the world to make this terms of service, and you can use them. We're sharing this with you so that we can be a force multiplier for the general industry. And we're also, after this, going to be working on a license for 3D printed things. So there's a license that really deals with, current licensing structures is meant for digital stuff that never leaves the digital. We are now in a realm that there is a digital things that come into the real world, that come in contact with liability and tort. If you make toy for kid dies. This is literally what is going to happen at one point. And depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the file and when that file went to whom and under what conditions it was shared with whom, different people could be liable for different things. So it all depends on the jurisdiction, it all depends on if you're like an architect or designer or manufacturer, and it all depends on which kind of country you're in. And it's a very scary place to be. And we know that a reasonable American liability or tort case could sink all but the biggest 3D printing companies. So we're just thinking just like one wrongful death thing, and unless you're AOS 3D Systems or Stratasys, you're dead. Right? You could be mid 50 million nice company, but you're gone with one US tort case. So this is why we're trying to make a license that will make it clear what your rights are, what rights you're passing out to people, and the functionality of the object. And the things that we are thinking about, for example, is to let rights degrade. So to give people the option of saying, for the first year it's non-commercial and no one can use it, and then afterwards, automatically, it will be free and open source to the world. And we're also doing things that we're trying to introduce a general legal principle saying, hey, because Mary made the file, Stacy adapted it, Tom printed it out with God knows what kind of settings on what kind of machine with what kind of filament, and we don't know, and there could be hundreds of combinations of these settings, or more even. None of the people in the value chain can be liable for the final part. We don't know if this is going to work, but we're really looking for your feedback and your help and information and ideas on creating a true license that is made specifically for things. So I hope you've kind of gotten an idea of some general principles, some general ideas that let you kind of maybe when you're going home on the train or in your car, maybe you can just then take stock of what's going on, and hopefully you can help identify the signals from the noise. Thank you so much for your time and attention.